What if you could see an accident before it ever happened? What would you do if you could experience the danger away from real life harm? Hey, this is Marc from Pre-Sight Safety, and you're listening to the Pre-Sight Podcast. Welcome along to episode 9 of the Pre-Sight Podcast, and in somewhat of a double header between this and episode 8, we're once again discussing virtual reality and its applications in safety training, both in oil and gas and more broadly in the chemical sector as a whole. I'm once again delighted to have been interviewed by Allister Thomas of Energy Voice magazine, and Allister and I enjoy a concise but concrete and really interesting conversation with regards to the recent virtual reality research programme that concluded in my team at the University of Strathclyde in collaboration with the Glasgow School of Art. We talk about not just the motivations behind that work, but we also talk about what its future applications might be, and perhaps most provocatively, think about how we frame such technologies for discussion with those that are most cynical about the uptake of this relatively new safety training medium, how we get people to consider new technologies like virtual reality versus the more traditional and, let's face it, far easier to construct PowerPoint slide deck. So without further ado, please enjoy this interview between myself and Allister Thomas of Energy Voice News.
Talking a bit about virtual reality, indeed we do hear about that a lot in not just the chemistry space, but certainly in oil and gas. And I suppose there is a perception of it certainly being in some cases box ticking. But maybe you can just tell me firstly a little bit about the research and the work you've been doing. Maybe to set it out for us firstly.
Sure. So a lot of this technical research came out of an earlier discussion that we had about Piper Alpha, but not just Piper Alpha, but the theme of which Piper Alpha is one example, that being large-scale disasters, not just in oil and gas, but across the chemical sector as a whole in its broadest sense. The specifics of Piper Alpha, of course, as we've spoken before, was about my father's escape from that and how he endured that afterwards, but with regards to this technical research, the specific part of the story that mattered there was me thinking about how he had managed to escape that disaster and so many others didn't. But then if you quickly move away from Piper Alpha and you can think about, any one of 70 plus disasters of a chemical type over the past several decades, and you could ask the same question, how did some people escape? How was it that others were not so lucky? And from that, and given my position at the university, the opportunity came up for me to think, well, how might we try to solve that sort of problem? Or in other words, how might we try to give people a sense of these accidents before they ever happen and let them see the sorts of accidents that could play out, even although trainers in their workplace could never recreate them safely. How can you give people a real sense of that without just telling them about it? And in that frame, that's where virtual reality became the natural fit, because the time is opportune to explore VR now. And by that I mean the technology, both hardware and software, are more readily available than they ever have been before. And so with a team in place, we were able to start seriously thinking about how to design that. What hardware do we use? What software do we use? And in our particular case, as I said, thinking about the chemical sector more broadly, we had a chance to collaborate with manufacturing staff at GlaxoSmithKline. And in their case, it's not natural gas or a ferocious explosion, the likes of which was on Piper Alpha, but an ammonia gas leak, the likes of which, if it gets loose, can cause just as much damage as what happened on something like Piper Alpha or similar oil and gas incidents. So in their case, the story was that they have robust training in place to get their staff trained up to work on their dangerous site, which involves using a lot of ammonia, which if it leaks could cause a large-scale disaster on their site, but also for the nearby surrounding town, such as the nature of that gas. But their pain point was that they can only ever really tell their staff about that accident. They can't properly recreate the conditions of what an ammonia gas leak would be like. They can't throw them into a space with ammonia gas and ask them to react to where the emergency shutdown is for the plant, or to react quickly to wind direction if they were suddenly impacted or met with a gas cloud. There's means and ways to simulate part of that, but never the full experience. And so in our case, the research problem became, how do we use virtual reality to help people do the complex task at hand, but also to think about what they would do in the event that a gas leak occurred.
It's really interesting stuff, Mark. It kind of evokes for me I guess it was a few years ago now. I was at a conference and a few of the union guys, they'd created this kind of animation with actors and things like that.
Yeah.
They kind of took you through the Piper Alpha, the night of Piper Alpha.
Yes.
And that for me anyway kind of gave me a much more solid sense of what people experienced, and I guess the terror, among other things, and what kind of elements they might have faced. Do you think that, I guess, this program, could give a new appreciation to, well, not just Piper, the GlaxoSmithKline example, but major accidents and just, I suppose, just hitting home, how horrible these things are, but obviously the safety requirements that people need to get their heads around.
So in terms of the impact of these things, if you think about what accidents happen in manufacturing just on an annual basis, for example, pick your favourite sporting arena. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. There's still more accidents every year than the number of people you could fit inside that stadium. That's how serious the issue is in terms of injuries alone. But one of the interesting stats and databases that we came across when we were thinking about the impact of this work was looking at not just things on an annual basis, but looking at large-scale disasters over the centuries. And to give you one example, if you think about the sorts of chemical spills and gas leaks that centred on this research, since about 1940 there's been over 160 of those. But if you put that in terms of human cost, someone who is a bit more cold and cynical might look at that same data and say, right, okay, over 160 accidents, about 4,000 people have died as a result of those accidents, which I dare say doesn't sound like a large number. But when you cast that in the theme of other things that we've spoke about in great detail, that being the long-term effects of such disasters, those 4,000 deaths map onto affecting over 1 million people, close to 2 million people. So when you look at the raw numbers, things look small, but they cast onto a larger number of people very, very quickly. And so a lot of people are largely affected in this, and probably in ways that such databases will never capture, given the long-term impact and what isn't reported in the news. But then the second part of your question regarding the sort of safety requirements for jobs like, various jobs on an oil rig, or in our case, looking at chemical manufacturing plants. If I put it in the way of the example of the job that we were trying to use VR for, the VR experience took people through the complex job required on site from A to B, from beginning to end. And one task took about 45 minutes. If you put that in the context of tying your shoelaces, which takes you a few seconds, just imagine thousands of different things that need to be done at that micro level that add up to make a really complex task that goes on for about 45 minutes. And that complex task from A to B, beginning to end of 45 minutes, is assuming that nothing goes wrong. So that's just to be able to train the person appropriately to do the job correctly without anything going wrong. So all of that's to say that, one of the major challenges with regards to preventative action to stop a lot of these accidents from ever happening is training people up to the right level of skill, such that you minimise the risk of things going wrong as a result of human error. A lot of these tasks on manufacturing sites or oil and gas platforms, it's just very difficult stuff to do, and you're asking someone to put a lot of steps in order and do a lot of small but compounding complex tasks to get the job done. And using something like VR in our case was motivated by the question, could this deliver a higher benchmark of training?
Just on the long, and I know we've talked about long-term effects before, but it does seem a prevalent point to pick up on.
Okay.
So the VR aspect, we can use this to help train people, but in terms of, I guess, its limitations, it can't really give somebody, or can it give somebody, I suppose it probably can't give people the perspective, for example, what your father experienced having survived and dealt with the challenges that he dealt with. It might give people a bit more appreciation, but I mean, maybe that element can't really be replaced by anything other than, I suppose, in-depth discussions with people like yourself and things of that nature. I'm just discussing the limitations on VR from that perspective in terms of giving that sense of things, really.
It's a really excellent question. My short answer would be not yet, but it's possible. It's certainly something I've thought about. But yeah, you're right. There is always a temptation with relatively new technologies like VR. It has been around for a long time at this point, but in terms of public perspective, it's still relatively new. And with that, there's the temptation to think that it comes with the ability to solve all the world's problems, that it will do the dishes for you. It's not. It's a technology that, when pointed in the right direction for a very specific task, will do wonders. But like every technology, it does have its boundaries and limitations, which, with the great efforts of people both on the research side and on the commercial side, is an ever-expanding set of boundaries. But for now, to pick up on your excellent point, I'd say the real main uses of VR in training are really for the immediate task, to get people as close to hands-on as possible before they're ever hands-on, and to give them a really immersive, present, engaging, active version of their training that might otherwise have been a passive set of PowerPoint slides. That's where the real power is for VR right now. But it would be foolish of me to miss out the points that VR goes well beyond training and is used for all sorts of media applications, and has been used for documentaries and filmmaking, and other media outputs. So there are means and ways to connect various applications of VR such that, these stories might be told in a different way beyond the sorts of things that I do now and doing, the sort of high impact speaking and talking about my father's case. That's just one way of doing this sort of thing. And it's a case of watching this space to see what comes next, because these limitations are not set in stone. As I said, it's all about the people at the forefront who are always trying to push beyond what we currently think is possible.
Fantastic. And just, I suppose, on a more practical level, you mentioned GlaxoSmithKline.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate this? I don't know what kind of discussions you might have had on a commercial basis yet. I mean, is there clearly it seems like there's quite wide application for this in terms of different industries that this could be used for. I mean, would you look to oil and gas among other kind of sectors for this, or where do you have specifically in mind? I suppose would be my question.
Yeah, well, indeed, and on those two parts, yes and yes. We've certainly been in discussions to turn what was originally a university research project run out of my research team in collaboration with friends and colleagues at the Glasgow School of Art. We've now been looking at turning that into a commercial enterprise. And whilst that has been birthed within the chemical sector more directly, as a result of me being a practicing research chemist, the connections with oil and gas and the underlying principles of what we've developed have made it eminently reasonable to consider applications in oil and gas. And indeed, we've had a few companies in the sector reach out to have discussions on that basis. And it's because of that, you know, from an educational perspective, for yourself, for others, it's always worth challenging where you actually place those categorical boundaries. We've used terms like chemical sector and oil and gas. But when it comes to how you actually solve the safety problems, there's much that can be achieved by partly ignoring, partly lifting the mask of those different categories and seeing what the similarities are underneath the hood.
Superb. Marc, I think that's probably pretty short and sweet, but I think that'll more or less be everything I'm looking for. Is there anything that we've not covered that you would like to discuss? Is there any points that we've not touched on that would be worth mentioning? Are you happy enough?
I think that more or less covers everything. What I would end with is it's very easy now to give it a go within your own home. It's very easy now to get your hands on it and give it a go, even with a simple video game that would give you enough of an introduction to then maybe think more seriously about those what-if questions in your head that you've maybe not taken seriously before. What if this video game that I'm playing on a simple, you know, household commercial VR set, what if that could become a more serious game? What if that could be used for my workplace? What if that could be used to train my staff to be as ready for the job as they're ever going to be before they ever get on site? You know, what if this thing that looks like a toy could become a serious tool for the workplace? So consider exposing yourself to it before you judge it if you're still not convinced by it.
I think it's an excellent note to leave it on, Marc. So thanks very much for taking the time. Do appreciate it as always. We really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Oh, real pleasure, Alistair. Thanks again.
Take care, Marc. Cheers.
Cheers, Alistair. Speak to you soon. If you like what you've heard, you can find more from the Pre-Site podcast and all our related articles on our website at pre-site-safety.co. That's pre-site-safety.co. We'll see you next time for another episode of the Pre-Site podcast. Be well.